Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast, IDP edition. I'm Jon Macri, and with the NFL preseason officially underway and with fantasy drafts in full swing, we are going to continue diving into the ADP to help you find the best value for your money. Last week, we focused on some undervalued players in drafts, and naturally, now we are going to cover those IDPs that are being overvalued at the moment in order to avoid those traps that can cost you a championship-winning roster in 2024. So let's get it. All right, we're here today to fade the overrated IDPs of the 2024 season, and joining me to help find these trap players, the perfect man for the job, someone who should never be faded, from DLF.com, the legendary Tom Kislingbury. Tom, how are you, good sir?
Hey, John, your intros are always absolutely stunning, as you are as a man. Yeah, really good. Thanks, buddy. I really like the way you go. The only person that can be horrible about every single player on the podcast is TK. So get him on. So yeah. we're going to do character assassinations, which is my favorite.
Well, I know you are very good at it, right? Like we have a tendency to be optimistic about players a lot of the times in the off season, and not everybody is looking at the whole picture, right? And in the way that you do, and able to find, reasons that these players shouldn't be as valued as highly as they are. And that's something that I think there could be a lot more of in IDP, right? Because a lot of people are kind of looking at the wrong things a lot of the time, especially year to year, in trying to evaluate who's going to be good and who isn't. So I think it is. I think it's a fun topic to discuss. I know it's more on the negative side or whatever, but to me, I love trying to find out different reasons to like or dislike players. And in this case, yeah, we're gonna dislike a few players here. So it'll be fun. But yeah, so we're talking fades today. And Tom, I know we could have probably found a lot more than 10 names that we're going to highlight today, but
we were quite good about it. I thought
yeah.
we were good. You sort of gave me half a list, and then you went, "Who you got?" And I started giving you more and more names, and you went, "No, we can't say every single player in football." Right. We were relatively sensible in the end.
Yeah. We'll try to keep it, relatively tight, but yeah, there's definitely, values that are overvalued beyond what we're going to talk about. And we're going to try to, keep it closer to the start of drafts, I guess, because these are the players that aren't like, gimmies or anything like that, as far as trying to, say that they're a bit overrated. But, if that makes sense. So I think the lowest player we have on here is like just inside the top 24 at their position. Everybody else is going pretty high. So there will be some big names on here to kind of highlight and to basically discuss why we shouldn't be investing in them at their current cost. So
sorry, John, I'm going to jump in and throw you.
Yeah, no, of course.
Sorry, pal. I think it's worth noting that there's a really good reason why we're not picking players lower down. So not only because it's sort of not much point and we don't have that strong opinions, but also because of the way IDP point distribution works. Really, I don't care who you're taking a gamble on at 24 in any position, because they're going to have a decent chance of doing okay. I'm fine with that. The question is much more, who do you not want to spend a higher pick on? Because when you spend those high picks, you're going, this is going to be way more beneficial than the offensive player, the equivalent I could get at that place, plus their swap over replacement down at 3 rounds, 10 rounds, 20 rounds later, or whatever it is. And it flattens out quite a lot, right? That curve goes down quite steeply and then it flattens along. So I'm not going to tell you you're wrong for anyone from 24 or 36 or 48. You do you, have a great time. I will tell you you're wrong at 4 or 7 or 8, because a lot of those are bad bets that are based on incorrect information, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way of putting it. And so just for reference, like the ADP that we're going to be using here for this, just as we did last episode, it's collected by the lovely folks over at the IDPshow.com. They've been running their off-season best balls all off-season, collecting ADP off of that. And you could get access to that on the IDPshow.com as well. I believe it's $5 a month, and it's part of their draft kit deal. So be sure to check that out if you want to dive into it yourself. But our goal here is to, get into the minds of the drafters from those drafts, see how they're valuing some of these IDPs, and essentially tell them why they're wrong, I guess, but not in a way that's meant to help our fellow IDPers better value these players and improve roster construction for the 2024 season. So before we get into those names, I do want to mention to everyone that you can dominate your fantasy leagues this season with PFF. Use code PFF. Use code Fantasy25 to get 25% off your PFF Plus annual subscription. Gain access to our fantasy mock draft simulator, draft rankings, live draft assistant. For those familiar with our new and improved looking rankings page, we are adding IDP rankings to that finally as well, where you'll get draft rankings, dynasty rankings, rookie rankings, and of course weekly rankings from me for IDP. And they look so much nicer too on a nice new page with more features for those IDP rankings planned for the future. You'll get access to waiver wire targets, buy low, sell high advice, rest of season rankings, and more. Just go to subscribe.pff.com and use code Fantasy25 at checkout, or click the link in the episode description. All right, Tom, let's get into it now and start right away with a name that people are going to be mad about, I'm sure, because I know they love some Justin Madubuike of the Baltimore Ravens, being drafted as DT4 slash DL23 right now. So tell us what's got him on your fade list for this season.
I really like him as a player as well. He was obviously very classy last year, and frankly, I think he played really well the year before as well. He was playing much less, so he wasn't quite the name, but he exploded last year. And that's the thing that worries me, because he really did explode last year. So we'll talk about this quite a lot for pass rushers. But when you look at pass rushers, there's a few different things going on. You've got volume. You've got how much you turn that volume into pass rush, because there are linemen that play a lot against the run and don't actually rush the pass much. Then you've got players who turn that pass rush into pressure, and then you've got players who turn that pressure into sacks. And sometimes all of those things come together to make an amazing fantasy season. So Madubuike had, you've got it right here. How many sacks did he have last year? Like 14 sacks, right?
13.
13. And from memory, I believe he had a sack in 11 or 12 different games. So it's like almost every week in the regular season, he was having a sack. In a lot of leagues, right? Having a sack is the difference between a bad week and having a good week. So everyone was sitting there going, I'm going to start him every week, and it's working really well. And it did work out really well. It was absolutely amazing. But he did that because he had really high conversion rate from pressure to sacks. Now, his pressure rate was absolutely brilliant. So if I quickly look it up, I've got it here somewhere. Here you go. His pressure rate is 12.5%. So pretty good for an interior rusher. I mean, it's not Aaron Donald, right? But nobody's Aaron Donald. But it's really solid. You look at 12.5% and go, okay, you're creating pressure. What's that? 1 in 8 snaps. That is really good. But 1 in 8 snaps of rushing the passer. You might rush the passer as an interior lineman maybe 30 times in a game, maybe 40 if you're really lucky. You're probably looking at 4 to 6 pressures, something like that. And out of that is sort of about how many of those pressures you turn into sacks. Now, Madubuike last year had about 22% pressure. Really good, really solid. But anything above probably 12 to 14 for an interior rusher is, in my mind, unsustainable. When we see those numbers, almost nobody does them year after year. So you look at that number and go, it was brilliant, it was great, but it's probably going to climb down. And it's going to climb down, not because he's going to get worse. We're not saying that at all. But pressure to sacks is mostly created because the quarterback didn't see the guy coming, or didn't quite get the ball out, or it wasn't quite open, or it came out of his hand a fraction of a second later. And those things just even out over time. It's not that he's going to be worse. He can play just as well. He can even play better, but he's probably not going to have a sack in 11, maybe 12 games. I mean, who knows? Maybe he has 10 sacks again. But even so, they're more likely to be a bit more clumpy. You're very unlikely to have sack, then a sack, then a sack, then a sack, then a sack. And if you have 10 sacks in 6 games compared to 11 sacks in 14 games, your startableness compared to the others is wildly different. So I think there's a lot of ways that Justin cannot be as effective, and not many ways he can be as effective as he was last year, even if he plays even better.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think this is like the perfect name to kind of start with, right? Because people are definitely going to be excited about him because of what he did last year. But I've literally cautioned the exact same thing all off season about, putting too much stock into him, right? Because we could look at his 13 sack season last year and be extremely happy for it when we had him on our roster, or if we, were envying him on someone else's roster, whatever the case. But it was last year, right? We can't just copy and paste those numbers to this year either. It just doesn't really work that way. So like you said, you think about how he got to those 13 sacks. He literally had to go on a historic sack streak of like 11 games to get there, right? So
I looked it up. Nobody's ever done that. Nobody's got close to it.
So we cannot bank on that again. It's just not going to happen. And like you said, the pass rush metrics are actually pretty good for him, top 15-ish numbers across the board, but they aren't necessarily numbers that also project to 13 sacks again, which is what we kind of have to factor in. And then again, not like you said, with defensive interior pass rushers, hitting double-digit sacks in back-to-back seasons is already incredibly rare. It's more for like guys like Aaron Donald and Chris Jones, and not even they do it every single year, right? And I just don't know that Justin Madubuike is in that conversation just yet as an Aaron Donald or a Chris Jones type pass rusher where we can rely on that every single year.
I'm totally with you. The way I see interior line is at any given time, you've got between 4 and 6 elite guys, and those are the best interior rushers. Now, obviously, Aaron Donald's retired. Pour one out for the NFL because, Hall of Fame player gone. But apart from him, you've probably got Chris Jones. You've got Jeffrey Simmons, I think belongs in that. He's been a bit quieter recently. Quinnen Williams, arguably. DeForest Buckner, arguably. And after that, you go, is Justin Madubuike in there? He might be. I hope I'm wrong and he proved himself, but I'm not confident of that at all. I think he is different to those other guys. And then you got Dexter Lawrence, who, we've talked about Dexter Lawrence before. Amazing player, done great stuff, but he's not the same as those other guys. Right. Dexter Lawrence and Chris Jones are a different thing. Jalen Carter hasn't quite put it together. Christian Wilkins is a different sort of player. So the bet is not, do you think Justin Madubuike is number 4 or number 5 or number 6? It's, do you think he's in that top tier who stay in that top tier year after year? It's one of the more stable positions in football. And if he is, great, no problem. You can feel really confident. I want to see a little bit more before I'm willing to invest that.
Yeah. I think that's a really fair way of looking at it. And like you said, he can absolutely get better this season, increase his pass rush metrics across the board, establish himself among the elites as far as, grading and things like that, and still not reach those double-digit sack numbers just because of all the reasons that you laid out before. So I'm with you. I think there's definitely reason to temper expectations here for Justin Madubuike heading into 2024. But let's talk about another player who stood out to me, and one that I think might be even more egregious than when we dive into the numbers compared to where he's going in ADP. It's Kayvon Thibodeau of the New York Giants going as edge 12 / DL 12 right now, and I really hate this ADP ranking of him. To me, he is kind of the epitome of an overvalued IDP at the moment, and an excellent case to kind of highlight why we shouldn't be chasing sacks year to year as well. He had 11.5 sacks last year. Again, that's very exciting to people, especially when it's done by a highly drafted player like Thibodeau. I think he was the 5th overall pick in 2022. People look at those two things alone and say, this is the guy. He's made it. He's the next great edge, Nick Bosa 2.0 or whatever. But when you dive deeper into those numbers, you realize just how, I guess, kind of lucky he was to get those 11.5 sacks, because he was far from good last season, no matter how you slice it. His pass rush grade, 63.1, ranked 81st at the position. His pass rush win rate, 6.4%, ranked tied for 106th at the position. His pressure rate, 8.6%, ranked tied for 100th at the position. His expected sack total, despite playing 520 pass rush snaps, which the pass rush snaps ranked 10th at the position, but his expected sack total ranked tied for 48th at the position, which for anyone that's listened before knows that the playing time is baked into those expected sack totals. So when you have top 10 playing time and still barely crack the top 50 in expected sacks because your pass rush metrics sucked, to weigh that number down, by all accounts, his metrics sucked. And then that's the thing. So I really worry about this ranking for Thibodeau. He's another one that, yeah, sure, he can improve this season like Justin Madubuike as far as, pressure rate and pass rush grade and all those kinds of things that we look at, and still not get those 11.5 sacks again. But those numbers themselves, they're not nearly as encouraging as they were for Madubuike. Those are really, really poor numbers for a pass rusher. And I mean, even if you look at his total tackles, like a guy that played nearly 1,000 defensive snaps, he had just 36 tackles, not including sacks. That left him negative 20.3 tackles below expectations, which was a bottom first percentile mark at the position. So he doesn't even really have a strong production floor if he's not getting those sacks, which it's very concerning to me. So how are you feeling about Kayvon Thibodeau here heading into your
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. We'll talk about his pass rush in a minute. I totally agree that was bad. Just looking at tackle numbers, I was like, oh, have a look at that. He is significantly worse tackle numbers than DJ Wonnum, who is absolutely dire. So the way I look at Kayvon Thibodeau is 41 pressures, something like that, just behind Calais Campbell, who is nearly 40 and was playing weirdly on the edge and shouldn't be last year. Dennis Gardeck, the Barbarian, Tyquan Lewis, Byron Young, Cam Jordan. Like, this is a load of guys that people are going, oh, yeah, he's not looking anywhere near as good as he was. He's fading. Those guys, you can't trust them anymore. They're near the end of their career. And they were having better numbers than Thibodeau, apart from that one golden sack number. And that was great. If you had him last year, I hope you enjoyed him. It was wonderful. But a lot of his reputation comes from those sack numbers and the fact he was drafted very highly. We know that people don't change their mind on players that get drafted highly. They will stick with them. I've got a friend that still believes in Sam Bradford. And Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold he likes. Like, he's still out there now. We watched a few games in the off season, and we really fall in love with those guys. And he's got an X in his name, which is really cool. But there's really not much to believe. In 2 years' time, people are going to be looking at Kayvon Thibodeau going, oh, we made a mistake on that one. It's time to let him go. But right now, they're not ready to let him go yet. They still think he's better than he is.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, it's definitely early in his career and stuff, and like maybe he does get better, but those numbers were so bad, so scary to kind of look at, and where he's lumped in amongst those other pass rushers, like you said. So I tweeted something out today that actually kind of looks at like historic comps for guys with poor pass rush grades, but delivered strong sack totals, how they typically do the following year. Essentially something like this. So since 2018, there have been 65 instances of a defensive lineman recording double-digit sacks with a pass rush grade below 75.0. Only 9 of them, so 14%, were able to get double-digit sacks again the next season. For defensive linemen that got double-digit sacks with a pass rush grade below 65.0 in the same season, not a single one repeated among the 12 that did it the next year. So Kayvon Thibodeau qualifies as the latter with the sub-65 grade, as does another name that we'll discuss here shortly. So that's since 2013. So the repeat numbers for these guys that have those poor pass rush grades and hit double-digit sacks is brutal, to say the least. So, and a lot of them were like the same guy. It was like Chandler Jones a couple times. I think Matt Judon, Daniel Hunter had another one. So it's really, really poor for outlook for Kayvon.
Interesting name that is on that list as well. And I've done the same exercise, so I'm totally with you there. Is he's falling out of my head. Bears draft Leonard Floyd.
Yes. Yes.
Who I see as similar sorts of players. They've got that long, rangy body, very long arms, big wide span, very athletic. Everyone gets excited about flexibility, but actually a sort of one-dimensional pass rusher. Right. Don't have a lot of moves, can't really win on the ball rush, frankly don't have an inside counter. They're going to do okay. They're not bad players. They're useful, but when you look at them, go, are they an elite pass rusher? Not really. They're interesting players.
Yeah, that's a great call. Yeah, Leonard Floyd was definitely on that list. All right, let's talk about another name that you found along the defensive line, going just ahead of Kayvon Thibodeau as Edge 11/DL 11. What are your thoughts on Khalil Mack of the Los Angeles Chargers heading into this season?
Man, I feel bad about this one as well, because last year Khalil Mack was such a good story. It was wicked. Yeah. He's been a brilliant player. Everyone loves him. His time in the Raiders was great. His time as a Charger has been really good. I really like watching him. It's really fun. But last year, I think, was a real standout. So if you look at his pressure rate over the last few years, let's do the last 5 years, 13%, 11%, 12%, 11%. And typically, you do see pass rushers after the first 3, 4, maybe 5 years in the league, it starts tailing off. It actually starts tailing off really, really quickly. And it's generally a long, slow decline until some team, let's call them the Cardinals, stops paying them. And then Khalil Mack last year jumped up to nearly 17%. So the highest his pass rush effectiveness has been since 2016 in his third year. Now, great, he played really well. You can't take that away from him. It was really good. Do you think he's going to do it again? Am I confident that, that they changed something? Probably not. Again, if you look at his conversion rate, then up to 20%. He's only hit 20% twice in his whole career. Mm-hmm. So last year, everything came together really, really well, and it was brilliant to watch. Yeah. But I sort of think it was his last good year. He's 33. Pass rushers age quickly, and this is a normal thing where people go, "Oh, they figured out how to use him and stuff like that." I mean, what do you think he's doing differently? He's just rushing the passer, man. It's not that different. So. I hope I'm wrong, because I really want Khalil Mack to have this Indian summer and perform really well again. But I think last year we'll look back on his career and go, it was sort of in decline, as is totally normal. And he had that one amazing last glorious moment, and then it faded away again.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It wouldn't be unusual for a 30+ year defensive lineman to hit, double-digit sacks one year and then drop off significantly the next. And yeah, Mack, he's very much in that range in his career now, where, yeah, again, pass rush metrics, all those kinds of things, they're not likely to remain too stable here. We've seen that from him recently. He's gone from 74 pass rush grade in 21, dropped to 68.2 in 2022, then did that massive jump last year, 86.3. And I guess I don't dislike Mack as much as some of the other D-line fades here, because he did have those encouraging pass rush metrics and playing time last year, which, kind of help him be productive. But again, like you said, he's 33 years old now. Maybe Joey Bosa can be healthy for an entire season for once. You got Tuli Pelotu showing promise last year as well. So maybe they don't rely on Mack as heavily. You combine that with some of the natural regression in his pass rush ability as he gets older. And I'm with you. I definitely worry about him being top 12 again. He'll rank outside that range for me for sure.
Yeah, right. That's the thing. And he's down at 11, right? So I don't hate him against the other players around him. So it's easy to look at him and go, in ADP, he's just ahead of Thibodeau, who we've just said we hate, Montez Sweat, who's on your list, Trey Hendrickson, who's got some questions, Hassan Reddick, Jonathan Grenard, Howard Landry. I'm not sure he's ever going to be the same as he was. Alex Highsmith is down there. I really like him over Mack. But you don't look at those two and go, are any of them much better than Mack? That's not the question we're making, though. You're looking at when Mack comes off the board, look at the running back or the tight end going at the same time, and then flip them over. So let's say we took Alex Highsmith, right, who's going at 50 picks later, and the difference in the tight end between that Khalil Mack and that Highsmith is night and day compared to those two, who are probably pretty similar. So that's just about smart drafting. We should talk about his run defense as well. So Khalil Mack has spent his whole career, right, and he was the poster child for an amazing edge setter who would really play the run really well and was absolutely brilliant. And that wasn't there last year. It wasn't that he was bad, but he's absolutely lost his edge as a brilliant run defender.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see, again, like how often they just rely on him on those early downs, right? Because last year, again, the Joey Bosa injury kind of screwed things up a little bit. Not that Joey Bosa is a great run defender either, because he's really not. But Khalil Mack, to me, I thought he played pretty well against the run last year, like relative to some of the other edge defenders in the league. But it's not really like something that I think you have a 33-year-old out there doing, where his talent, his value is based in his pass rush, right? Where if you want to keep him fresh and keep him healthy and have him as effective as he could possibly be, I do think that you prefer to have him on pass rush downs versus run defense downs. So that I'm with you. I think that part could definitely kind of come down a bit too.
Yeah, and look, it's fair enough. You guys have got him as a 90 grade, and you liked him much more in the run game than I do. Fair enough. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, but let's assume you're right, and explore it. And we go, Joey Bosa definitely is not a 90+ grade run defender. And this is the obligatory point when people on Twitter are like, he's never fit. He's had a couple of whatever. Let's assume you're an offensive coordinator and you're going, I've got to run the ball around the edge. I've got Khalil Mack, or I've got Joey Bosa. What am I going to do? And there is a correlation, for most teams where they have a real rotation at the edge, then it's less of an issue than it used to be. Right. But the Chargers are one of those teams who see their as starting edges. They've got their starters and they've got the guys behind them. Now, obviously, new coaches. We'll see what happens in there as well. But that's been a long-term Chargers thing, and I sort of expect it to happen looking at their roster, because the depth behind those two guys is nowhere near where they are. So over 1,000, 1,100 snaps, then the choices of where their offensive coordinators choose to attack does have an effect in tackle numbers. It might be 5-10 tackles, but that's the difference between an extra game and not an extra game for an edge. So it stacks up.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay, let's talk about another young pass rusher here, not unlike Thibodeau. That again, people might see the sack production and know about the draft capital and just assume he's one of the elites now. It's Trayvon Walker of the Jacksonville Jaguars being drafted as the edge 22 / DL 26. So probably, I guess this is probably our lowest positional ranking that we have on our list today, but still someone that I don't think is really deserving of that top 24 rank at his position. Even if he did get the 10 sacks last season, kind of going back to that stat I had about repeat double-digit sack DLs with poor pass rush grade. Walker, like Thibodeau, qualifies in that lower than 65.0 pass rush grade bucket, where there is 0 instances of repeating over the last decade. He's an interesting case because he was always viewed as this project defensive line with like insane athletic traits, but didn't quite have the pass rushing chops to hit the ground running in the NFL. So we knew we would have to be kind of patient, and it's not that I'm completely out on him, I guess, getting there eventually. It's still, again, early in his career as well, but I think, projecting him inside the top 24 right now is just way too high for me. Again, we assume these athletic freak types get better slowly over time, but if you look at his PFF grades, Walker actually got worse last year, pretty much across the board from his rookie season, right? His pass rush grade dipped. He ranked outside the top 100 there. His tackling grade dipped, with his missed tackle rate being among the worst in the league. His run defense grade dropped as well. That ranked like 120th, and his overall grade, a 52.3, ranked 123rd at the position. So awful stuff. I mean, the only thing about Walker, for me, that you can make an argument for him being drafted among the top 24 edges is his playing time. He played 869 defensive snaps last year, which was the 12th most at the position. So there can be good weekly production just by default, but his ceiling, as far as delivering those big sack totals, again, I feel like it's extremely capped by those really bad pass rush metrics. There's, you mentioned this player before, but I was looking at the numbers. There's essentially no difference between him and DJ Wonnum right now. And Wonnum isn't drafted anywhere near the top 24. In fact, he's like edge 60 or DL 80, right? So the difference being that Wonnum isn't a former first overall pick. Otherwise, they're the same picture. One just comes with an incredibly inflated price tag because of his name. So I don't know about you. There's
but he's
no
an athlete. He's fast. We've never seen him. Blah 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 blah. It doesn't matter, right? Nobody pays for that. So I've got a question for you. Where have you got him ranked this year?
That's a good question. So
obviously lower than 24, but because I know what my number is, and I look at it and go, well, that seems quite low. But
I have been in the midst of updating my rankings, but right now he is DL 61 without doing the final update. So yeah.
Dude, I'm on 60. So we're at one difference. So there you go. Two of us have, assuming that you're in a standard sort of IDP league, right? And 12 teams, maybe 14, you're starting 2 edges. If you're not in that top 24 or top 28, you're not going to be an end of season starter. And the two of us have got another 30, 35 players above him in that. Yeah. So at that point, he's barely if we just take the top 2 edges of every single team, he's barely scraping into the bottom of that list. Yeah. And that really worries me. And I agree with you. That's baking in the amount of time he's going to be on the field, because the Jags obviously want to see him go well. There's a load of people in that building who will do a much better job of keeping hold of their jobs if he looks good. So there is an incentive for him to do well. And you have a lot more faith than I do in him coming good, because I just haven't seen it at any level.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, right? Like even out of college, like I just never understood. Like, I get the athleticism. I get that there's NFL teams that value that, but it never made sense to take him over Aiden Hutchinson. It just didn't, right? It was, the mystery box meme from Family Guy where, the mystery box could be anything. It could even be a boat, or, you can have the boat right now. Aiden Hutchinson was the boat. Trayvon Walker absolutely was the mystery box. And so far it has looked like a really poor value, especially considering how good Aiden Hutchinson looks through 2 seasons already in the NFL. So weird evaluation there by the Jaguars. And look, I hope, it works out for them, but it's really not looking good right now. So
the Jaguars suck at drafting pass rushers, don't they? When you look at some of the guys they've invested high picks in, you just want to shake those people and go, look, even Dante Fowler. And Dante Fowler's had some good moments in the NFL, but was he worth did he go 3rd overall?
He was like 3rd overall. Yeah,
something like that. I mean, that's laughable, like genuinely laughable. So I have a lot of love for the Jags, and I really like to see them go well, but like learn what makes a good edge, and it's not being tall and fast.
Yeah, that's at the very least, that is what they should take away from this draft pick. So episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. In today's hectic world, it's easy to focus on everything except yourself and your own mental health. Sometimes you just need a little help to make sure that stays on track as well. Therapy can be really useful to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns and behavior and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a convenient, flexible, and entirely online way to get therapy that's right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/PFFfantasy today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFFfantasy. All right, let's talk some linebackers now. And Tom, you found a good one to start us off with, and one that I've got a lot of questions about this offseason. Why isn't he higher in your ranks? Is he an LB1? Things like that. So tell us about Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah being drafted as LB19 right now.
19, yeah, and look, we talked about this. I literally came on here just now and said I'm not going to complain about anyone you pick at LB number 24 or whatever. So we should do the setup. So my point of view for linebackers is volume equals production. That's pretty inarguable. That's how it works. And in the modern NFL, there are about 30 full-time linebackers. Now, there's still a handful of teams that use 2 of them, and some of them don't have any, and blah, blah, blah. But there's about 30 of them. So my cutoff point is if you're in that top 30, I sort of value you all equally. The number 28 guy is not that far away from the number 4 guy. If you're not in that top 30 guy, if you're not a full-time linebacker, I sort of value all those equally as well. And JOK is not a full-time linebacker. He never has been. So if you look at his pure snap count last year, he played in 16 games and he played an average of 47 snaps in each of them, about 750 snaps. Now you hear that and you go, 16 games, 47 snaps? That sounds okay. But your benchmark for the top LB1s, which is the guys who stay healthy and are full-time all year, they're playing 1,100 snaps now. So even if you miss, on average, all starting defensive players miss about 2.5 games a year. So that's about 120 snaps. You're still looking at nearly 1,000 snaps. And that's going to be your top 12, maybe a top 18. If you take off another game, another 2, you're sort of getting down to 850, 900 snaps if you're missing 4 games a year. And then you've got JOK, who played 750 snaps last year, which was, I haven't got it right in front of me, but outside the top 40, I think. And he was healthy, right? He was out there every week. He was playing 16 games. Now, sure, you missed one. Everyone missed the game, but basically the Browns rested their whole starting defense in the last game of the season anyway. So it's not like he missed a game. They just left in that same game. Myles Garrett didn't play. Zadarius Smith didn't play. Sione Takitaki, who I'm a giant fan of, didn't play. All the superstars. So that's pretty much as good as you can hope for. And they do not think he is a full-time player. So 50 snaps, right? Which is relatively light. 50 snaps is sort of what you want for that top 35 or 40 linebacker. And he hit that in 1 to 5 or 6 games over the whole season. And that was late in the season once they started having some roster attrition. So JOK, I like the idea of JOK. He's fast, he's flexible. You can line him up in the slot against tight ends. You can put him in the box. it's a nice idea. As a player, he sort of reminds me of Telvin Smith. Now, Telvin Smith was an awful human being, so I'm not trying to condone that in any way. But as a player, I think there's a lot of similarities, and he was a really good modern NFL linebacker. But he was a full-time player, and Owusu Koromoa is not, and they've never thought he is. Now, are they going to change their mind? Are they going to treat him a different way? Sure, it's possible. But he's played a few years in the NFL now, and he's never done that, and no coach has ever thought he was that. Is that going to change suddenly? I don't think he is. So for me, he's outside top 30. And I hate drafting a non-full-time linebacker, especially one who's never done it before, as top 30. That seems like throwing away money to me.
It is, right? That's the thing. You literally have the exact same notes that I do. We're on the same wavelength here, because you mentioned it. You could look at 30 full-time linebackers. Those guys can all be valued very similarly. And JOK last year averaged 76% of the defensive snaps on the year. They brought in Jordan Hicks, right? So Jordan Hicks does seem like he's going to get the play calling duties on the field, which pretty much locks him into a closer to a full-time role than what JOK has been. And yeah, under Kevin Stefanski and company, there's never been more than one full-time linebacker on any given week. And they just run. Yeah, exactly. And they run a very heavy rotation there at the position. It just doesn't bode well for like an undersized player like JOK, who is going to be that LB2 on the team. But, it's LB2 can be nice for some teams, but not in Cleveland, right? Where it's just not a healthy enough role that it's a lock to lead to, top 10 or top 20 production like he's being drafted. And, the other part of that, and something that's been key for linebacker tackle production as well, is that the Browns were the most man heavy defense in the entire league last season, which for those that have listened to me talk, linebackers before know that man coverage is an efficiency killer for linebacker tackle production. It's a small edge, but there is at least a correlation there. And then you consider, the success that defense had last season utilizing those coverages. I wouldn't expect them to change that in 2024. So yeah, JOK is outside my top 30 as well. I'm using projection-based rankings here, and that role in that defense, it just doesn't project very strongly at all. So, people say things like, big play upside, which we know is just a fallacy that people like to lean on and not something we can confidently predict week to week or year to year. So I am concerned about that draft position for JOK.
So I'm just looking at where I've got him. I've got him down as LB64, which feels a little bit low. I mean, if somebody said mid-50s, I'd probably feel more comfortable. But going back to what you said about Stefanski and his Browns, they are one of the when we say there's 30 full-time linebackers in the NFL, that means some teams don't deploy full-time linebackers, and you've generally got the Patriots because they're not really into that at all. Yeah. And the Browns have been right up there in the past few years, and it's very easy as linebackers and traditional football fans to go, no full-time linebacker, or they're doing it wrong. But what that means is that on any play you're doing that, you're either messing about with the defensive line and basically playing an overload odd defensive line against a team that's not expecting it, or you're putting an extra safety on the field, which is more flexibility, more versatility, more ability to match up. Both of those are progressive things to do. So not having a full-time linebacker is a brave thing, in the same way that we talk about man and zone coverage, right? And you sort of go, oh, man coverage, that's manning up with people and playing on their hip and that sort of call. But zone in many ways is a way more aggressive call, because you're asking players to sit there and make a call and move on the ball. I would argue that not having a full-time linebacker is similar. You're betting on flexibility, and you're asking players to make decisions and react to what's in front of them and do a better, faster, smarter job. So it's great to see, but it kills IDPs, man. The reason I've got them down at 64, I've got Jordan Hicks at 45. So I don't have a Browns linebacker anywhere near that top 30. I just don't feel confident in them.
Yeah, there have been infamously a poor group to kind of target for IDP drafts. And I know JOK has like his spike weeks every once in a while, but it's just not something that we can consistently rely on. And that's what I worry about for him. So I have him outside. I think it looks like outside top 40. But again, I'm in the midst of updating here, but yeah, not anywhere near that LB19 range.
I need to disagree with you on someone. So whoever you're saying next, I'm going to fight you on it.
All right. Okay. So we'll put another name out here and see if we can disagree. And it is another linebacker I think that's worth discussing, because it's one that I touched on just briefly at the end of my linebacker rankings episode a couple weeks ago. It's Patrick Queen of the Pittsburgh Steelers, being drafted as LB9 in ADP right now. So now you got to defend that. Tom, because Queen, he had an amazing season last year, right? He was really productive, 130 tackles, 3.5 sacks, an interception, other big plays were in there. But that was last year, right? On a different team. And again, using our preferred scoring, he finished as just LB19 and he played all 17 games, essentially barely missing a single snap. So now he's being ranked significantly higher than his finish last season on a new team that has recently been quite content to deploy all of their linebackers specific to situations and cause a bit of a rotation. So that was kind of my concern with Cole Holcomb joining the team last year. We did see him come off the field a bit before his injury. Now, I do think Queen is the clear favorite to lead this team's linebackers in snaps and production and all that, but I don't think top 10 is the range that we should be projecting him really at all. You know, you look at the Steelers defense again, how they project similarly to the Browns is that they are one of the more man heavy schemes. So right away that hurts his potential efficiency. But then you combine that with Queen as a player. He's never been particularly effective as a tackler to the point where we can look at him and identify him as this like scheme proof tackler who's going to overcome man heavy defenses and things like that and deliver above average tackle efficiency. It's just not him, right? And one of the things that's been more sticky year to year for the linebackers is that below average linebacker tackle efficiency. And if you look at just his tackles versus expected numbers since 2021 and where he ranked, last year he was 9th percentile, 2022 he was 16th percentile, 2021 he was 15th percentile. So you can't even point to his tackling and say he's a lock to get 150 tackles because he's not even really close. Again, he's another big play upside guy that, we're chasing kind of some instability there when we say those kinds of things and it leads to traps. But there are guys I think that can repeat those big play numbers from one year to the next, but staking your claim on too many of them is just betting against the odds and just bound to result in a lot of losses. Right. So yeah, he's outside the top 24 linebackers for me. There's not really much that's going to change that before the season. So just being careful where we're drafting Patrick Queen.
I'm really regretting my decision to argue for him because I agree with a lot of that. He's never been very good. He had one good year, right? But a typical fantasy, right? I've never done this. I should do it. Imagine it in your head, a graph of go bad, 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 good. What do their owners in fantasy expect? Good, because they've unlocked him. They figured out how to use him, and you expect good, 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 good. Bad, what do you expect next year? Good, because he just had a down year, right? He's going to come back. Now, obviously, as a rabid anti-monarchist, I'm never going to defend Queen anyway. So the only thing I can clutch on to defend his point is I said earlier, and I've got to stand by my convictions. I value almost all of those top 30 guys the same. And I do think he's likely to be a full-time linebacker. I think Mike Tomlin's actually a fairly old school coach, which sounds wild given that it wasn't so long ago he was, the cutting edge of newness and the youngest head coach in the NFL. But I think he's fairly traditional. He's one of the few coaches or head coaches left in the NFL who likes the old-fashioned starter and reserves, and he likes that across the board. He likes it at running back, he likes it at tight end, he likes it at edge, and he likes it at linebacker. So I think if he can get through camp and preseason and look halfway decent, better than the others, and he's going to go in as full-time linebacker. Right. Now, even then, drafting him at LB9, no, I'm probably not going to do it. Let's look at the guys around him in a minute. But I'm desperately clutching at straws here, and that's as close as I can possibly get.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Like, I think, there isn't too much of a question, at least about his playing time. They paid him big money in the offseason and free agency, and, Cole Holcomb's not healthy. They don't really have any other options outside of him. So I think he's going to play the snap. So there's always potential that he can, get there on any given week to, perform and hit LB1 numbers. But I just like LB9 for me inside the top 10. I think there's a lot other better options who can do it more consistently.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Looking at ADP here. So Bobby Wagner down at LB12. Yes, please. I'll take that any day and twice on Sundays. And then down at LB18, Levante David. Yeah, definitely do that. Even Tremaine Edmonds down at LB22. Now, that's an interesting one, right? Because a year ago, we're sitting there going, maybe Tremaine Edmonds is not the LB3 or LB4. And he obviously wasn't. Everyone's gone, oh, he's terrible. He's never going to be bad. So really good example of the market reacting too much. Devin Lloyd down LB24. I love that value. Love that.
Yeah. There's a lot of full-time guys that again play in more favorable defenses and have been and can have more consistency than what we got with Patrick Queen. So, okay, one more linebacker to cover here, and another guy that I'm seeing go way too high based on his projection. I think in this defense, Tom. I know you've been a fan of his in the past,
I
but
have. I have.
how are you feeling about Frankie Louvu's LB 16 ADP heading into 2024?
Conflicted is how I'm feeling. So this goes back a long time. So back when I used to do snap counts every week, right? You know, way back in the day, and people used to tell me snaps was wasted. And the way I used to do it before modern data availability, I used to go on PFR every week, and basically I'd do it manually. I'd copy and paste each team, and I'd put them in there and get rid of it. And it took a couple of hours or whatever. It was so useful, right? Because the benefit of doing it manually meant every player is rooted in your brain, because you look at everyone, so you know all those 1,000 defensive players. And whilst I was doing that every week, I'd go through the Jets and go, Frankie Love, what a great name. I love him. And he was always getting 5-6 snaps here and there. And then he sort of moved around. He was playing edge then, and then he did other stuff. And then he rocked up and he had his big year in 2022. And before that, his total defensive snaps in 4 years had been 1,000 snaps in 4 years, so about 215 per year. And then suddenly in 2022 he played 940 snaps. He was thrust into that role. We didn't really see it coming. It happened right at the start of the season. And do you remember that week one? I think we talked at the time. We went, he's played like 65 snaps. Is that going to happen? Is that going to be a thing? And he had a brilliant year. He played 900 snaps. He had 100 tackles, and he was an IDP. I don't want to say stud, but he was really effective. And the important thing is that all the people that had him on their team plucked him from nowhere. And we talked about this in midweek. So there is a psychological thing. If you draft a guy in the first round and he's really good, you go, yeah, pretty good. You know, I believe him. He's on my team. And if you draft him in the third round, you go, yeah, it's okay. I feel not bad. And if you picked him up from nowhere because you're smarter than everybody else in the league, and you knew he was going to be great, then he sits in your roster, and he sits in your roster because he's not just a good player and a good asset. He is living proof that you are cleverer than all of your roster, all of your league mates. And Frankie Louvu is one of those guys. So he had that brilliant year, and he followed up in 2023 with another really good year. He played all that time, but he's never been very good. He's okay at football, but he's barely okay. I mean, you've got him there as 13th position rank, which is okay. Run defense a bit lower. Coverage, frankly, is worrying down there at 39th. Because that's the differentiator, right? It's fairly easy to rush the passer. It's fairly easy to play the run defense in the NFL. Now, obviously, I can't do it, but we're talking about people who are professionals. But playing coverage is different. He's never been good at that. So I'm looking at him now and his situation and going, the things that made you really good and the psychological attachment that people have for those are combined into making people think he's going to be much better than he is. So it's quite depressing, and nobody will like hearing he's probably not going to be that good again. Yeah, but it's true. He's not in a good situation. He's on a team that's likely to be bad. And the reason you're thinking he's better is because you want to be right and you want to feel clever, not because you really think it's true.
Yeah, that's the thing. I like Frankie Louvu as a player. I don't love him or anything like that. But again, the Commanders gave him a decent contract this offseason, but it doesn't really translate. That doesn't translate to IDP production, right? So, the one thing that I did this offseason to try and help people with kind of projecting linebackers for 2024 was I took like the most recent history from each team's defensive play caller, both in linebacker usage / snap share, as well as defensive coverage schemes, to kind of parse out the man and zone usages for each team, combined with playing time to rank some of like the more ideal defenses and linebacker roles within those defenses for IDPs. Now, it's a loose projection, obviously, because we can't predict exactly how each team is going to operate year to year. But there's often a lot to learn from that past usage, which can, was kind of the point of that whole exercise. And when projecting Dan Quinn's Washington defense now, they rank dead last as far as expected linebacker tackle efficiency. And that comes from both his man-heavy scheme that we saw in Dallas last year and a willingness to kind of rotate linebackers on and off the field. Now, I don't think Quinn is going to be rotating Bobby Wagner off the field much. And they did pay Louvu enough that maybe we do see a higher snap share than what Dallas's weekly LB2 was getting last year. But it's how he's kind of getting deployed that worries me, right? It very much sounds like they view Luvu as kind of this Sam linebacker, who's going to blitz a ton and play on the edge, which, as we know, it sucks for tackle efficiency. Which,
Yes.
because of the man heavy defense, it's already going to be low. So, there. Maybe this is one of the cases where, you can state big play upside, because if he's rushing the passer 100 plus times a season, that he, probably falls into 4 or 5 sacks. But at what cost is that worth it? Because his tackle numbers are likely going to suck relative to the position. And we won't know when those big plays or sacks are going to hit on any given week, which makes him kind of a pain in the ass to figure out when we're going to start him in redraft, right? So to me, that's not something I want out of LB16 where I'm drafting. I want more consistency than that. It's just not worth it. Like, maybe in best ball we like it because, the high upside or whatever, but even still, I think for me, Luvu's another one that I struggle with. He's outside the top 30 linebackers for me this season, so just doesn't seem like I'm going to have any Frankie Luvu at cost, and that's okay.
Yeah, I'm with you. So just looking at the numbers here, I've got him down for about 65, 70 tackles, maybe 80 if he's lucky, something like that, and maybe 4 to 6 sacks, something like that. So that sort of number basically tells me that in 4 to 6 weeks, he's going to be pretty useful. Maybe not an LB top 12, but, pretty useful, which means another 11 weeks, he's not going to be startable. And if you go, this IDB is going to be a bad decision in 11 out of 16 weeks or 17 weeks or 14 or fantasy season, whatever, you go, do I really want that? Probably not.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's going to be a frustrating one, I think, week to week. And watch, he's going to have like a 2 sack week or something week 1, and everybody's going to be, I told you so kind of thing. But what he's going to do the rest of the season, what he's going to do the rest of the season is going to tell the whole story here. But all right, let's look at some DBs now. And I mean, this is a position that most people already know to fade for the most part, but for those that haven't been fading DB, they are creating maybe even more issues for themselves, spending up on some really overvalued choices here that we've picked out, starting with Cameron Bynum going as safety 11 / DB 13. So Bynum, along with this next guy, actually might be my biggest regression candidate of the season, at least for defensive back. He posted an insane 137 total tackles last year, which was more than Patrick Queen, by the way, en route to a safety 3 overall finish. Now, at the very least, I am proud of drafters, I guess, for at least fading him beyond that top 5 range. That is nicely done. But there's a lot more fading, I think, that needs to be done here, in my opinion, because I have a really hard time seeing him repeat close to those numbers again this season. Like, I think what makes it especially difficult for him is that he is very clearly the free safety of the group, playing the large majority of his snaps from a deep alignment. He did that on 50% of his snaps last season, which makes him one of the few outliers to produce strong tackle numbers when playing that many snaps deep. Micah Fitzpatrick has a tendency to do it. He's done it before, although he is moving closer to line of scrimmage in recent years. But for the most part, even with those deep safeties, when they do have those big years, they're not repeating those tackle numbers again, and tend to regress, I think, closer to the mean the following season. You don't have to look much further than like Jalen Petrie from 2022 to last year. It's just not a sustainable tackle rate. So I will say, I guess the one thing helping Bynum more so than like our next DB fade is that it's at least the same defense as last year, right? Same defensive coordinator, all that. So some of the other usage that allowed him to find success can still be there, but it's just really unlikely when you take into account like the historical repeat rates for the position. It's just straight trash. Like when I pulled the 2022 to 2023 fantasy points and fantasy points per game correlation for all the positions, safety was actually worse than cornerback last year. It just 0.15 correlation in points per game and 0.12 in total fantasy points. Like, that is garbage. It's nothing. So yeah.
So I was going to say the same thing. Now, fine, we can quibble. I think cornerback and safety repeats rates are about the same. Maybe one of them is slightly worse. But the point is, anybody listening to this podcast will be like, "Oh, of course you can't trust cornerbacks to repeat. It's all over the place." Blah blah blah. They'll probably think there's a couple you can trust, which is nonsense. But whatever. They know cornerback is a bet, but safety is the same. And it's the same for the same reason. The fact you got, 60 to 70 guys who are all fighting for 12, and it's just not going to be the same very often. but people think that safety is more repeatable. Now, I'm with you. I think the scheme is really interesting. So the Vikes were up there with the Cowboys from the top of my head last year as being a real 3 safety defense. They would habitually have 3 safeties on the field. You know, that the Vikes had 3 safeties, played over 1,000 snaps each, and it's not that one of those guys plays in the slot, because they all move around a little bit. It's not just the slot guys as safety. We'll talk about that in the middle. It's way more advanced than that, and that's really interesting. I really like it. But whenever we say that player moves around, you know, your average player will go, he's really flexible, he's a chess piece, he can play in different positions, that must be good. But we know it's generally bad for an IDP. You want your guy to be doing the same thing overall and it to be an efficient thing. Yeah. So I like Cameron Bynum. He's interesting, but do you want to bet on him being top 24, let alone top 10? No, absolutely not. It's a bad bet.
Yeah, and I'm feeling the same way about another safety here, who, to me, this is my number 1 regression candidate for the position. Jesse Bates.
You're going to have hatred here. Everyone's going to hate you on this.
Yeah, I think so. Just judging by his ADP, Jesse Bates of the Atlanta Falcons going as safety 4/DB6 right now. So Bates, he finished actually tied with Antoine Winfield Jr. last year as safety 1 for our scoring. He's coming off a massive season that included 132 tackles, leading the position in tackles versus expected at plus 31.1. He also posted 6 interceptions, 11 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, and a defensive touchdown. Every single one of those numbers is a high risk for regression. Even the tackles, we just talked about it with Bynum and his tendency to play deep as well. But Bates is in, I think, an even worse spot to repeat because he played, I think it was 67% of his snaps from a deep alignment. And it's going to be a whole new coaching staff and defensive scheme this year, which again, to bring up Jalen Petrie as an example, it's exactly the combination that kind of killed his efficiency last year, right? So even if you aren't drafting him as like safety 1, top 5, top 10, like those still feel very difficult to bank on for me. Nothing, that he did last year really stands out as repeatable. So, if you look at his career as a whole, especially his last 2 seasons with the Bengals, there's nothing there either that should tell you this is his new norm. It's just very much looks like outlier production at this point. So I am not spending up to get that.
100% with you. And you talk about him playing deep. It's not a situation where the coaches in Atlanta last year went, we want you to do that. That's been his whole career. Yeah. He has been a dedicated deep safety pretty much the whole time, and that's his skill set. Now, sure, sometimes lightning strikes and you can do that. You mentioned Minkah Fitzpatrick earlier, and those numbers come up really good. Brilliant. But last year was the best year he's had. Now, I think it's worth talking about this. What tends to happen at this point is people with him on the roster go, well, why are you arguing he's going to suddenly get much worse? And we're not doing that. The point was, last year was the outlier. His career was going along this line. Last year was way up here. So arguing it's going to be back down there is a regression to what he has shown he does over time. It's not saying he's going to be much worse than last year. It's your expectations are based on the fact that last year was really good. So you want him to be really good again. And I wish that was true. But if that was true, then there would be no point never talking about dark horses or sleepers or value, because it would just be the same as last year. For every player to come through, you've got to have someone else fall apart. And it looks a lot like him.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like defense is so different from like offensive fantasy as well, right? Like offensive fantasy, dictates the pace. It starts from the quarterback out, right? As far as stability goes, it tends to be more stable because those are the guys kind of controlling the play, where, defense is a lot more reactive, right? Like outside of the defensive line, where we do find more stability, at least in like pass rush metrics and things like that, everybody else is kind of reacting to what the offense is doing. And that's why it's just so wildly different. And I have a really hard time, referencing points per game or anything like that to use as like an example of why a player is going to be good again, because it's just not going to work for IDP.
They're just not stable. And part of it is the volume, right? And hopefully everyone knows this, but it's always worth talking about this. Let's talk about 2 positions, which is quarterback and tight end. So when we look at quarterback, you go, there's 32 quarterbacks, ignoring buys, and any given week, your guy's got a 12 out of 32 roughly 40% chance of being a top 12 quarterback. That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
At safety, you've got a 2 out of, or a 24 out of 64 chance of doing that, and the 24th guy is not that impressive anyway.
Right.
So you're sort of looking at a 1 in 5, 1 in 6, 1 in 7 chance of that at most. It's just different. With tight end, it's even worse. There's really maybe 5 to 12 tight ends who are proper weapons who get significant targets every week in the NFL. It's only that. A lot of teams just don't target one tight end very much. Some will target a few tight ends. Some of them just won't do it very much because shock, there's not that many tight ends in the NFL, certainly as pass catchers. So for your good tight end, the chances of him being a good tight end every week, probably 50%. So it's way, way, way more stable. And defensive back is not that. It's nothing to do with how good that player is. It's nothing to do with who's getting targeted. It's pretty random for which 24 of those 64 guys are going to do it in any given week on any given season. So your guy did it last season. Brilliant. I hope that worked out really well for you, but it's unlikely to happen again. And this was Pitre that we talked about last year. There was no reason for him to rack up those numbers. Arguably he got targeted too much, but there was no real reason. It happened, great, but there was no reason for it. So it's probably just luck. I would argue Jesse Bates is the same as last year. Last year, everything came together, and it always comes together for somebody. Brilliant. I hope you did really well out of it. But lightning is probably not going to strike again.
Yep, that's the thing. There will be a new Jesse Bates this year, and the pool is just so massive to try and find that next guy. So you may as well fade the position as a whole. But last name on the list here, Tom, another one that people are going to find controversial because he's a beloved name now in the IDP world. Hell, I love him as well, but there's something to be said about his ADP right now. So, Tom, you put him on your list. What is it that concerns you about Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions being drafted as CB2/DB5 right now?
Yeah, I'm not going to get some hatred for this, so I apologize, everybody. And we literally had this conversation of the week, right? We both love Brian Branch. We both really enjoy him as a player, and we want to see the Lions do well. You have more confidence in him than I do this year, but it's really simple. I don't think he's a full-time player. So last year he played, again, remember we talked about JOK just now? We were like, oh, the top players play 1,100 snaps. Brian Branch missed a couple of games last year, but he played 730 snaps. So his average per game is, let's look it up quickly, about 50. So even if he played those other 2 games, he'd be on 850 snaps. And it's really easy to go, oh, he's a rookie, he's going to play more, and he was really good, and he proved himself, and blah, 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 blah. But for him to play all the time, you need to take somebody else off the field. Now, that might happen, and sure that the team are making noise about him playing more. But do we think that the Lions are going to significantly change their defense to keep him on the field? It's possible. But he's fundamentally a slot guy. So there's a lot of argument whether he should be called a cornerback, whether he should be called a safety. Frankly, I think a safety who plays in the slot is an NFL position. And that's not an oxymoron, because you're looking at when he's not in the slot, what is he doing? And most slot corners, when they're not in the slot, are playing outside corner. He's one of there's probably a handful of 5 or 10 guys in the NFL who are playing in the slot, but when they're not in the slot, are playing deep. It's just that sort of skill set. He's definitely one of those guys. So possible he could play in the slot and then they take off a safety. But then you look at the rest of the players on their team and you go, well, who's going to come off the field? Because you can't keep them all on the field. You have to make a choice. So we're looking at their defense and we're going, Kirby Joseph played pretty well last year, did all right. Ifeatu Melifonwu played all right. I mean, Brandon Joseph, probably not the guy, but they're okay. It's really easy to go, well, Brian Branch is better than them, but he's got a different skill set. And we know the Lions think he's got a different skill set because last year we just saw them having their best season ever and they used him in a different way. Yeah. Could it change? Yes, absolutely could. Is it likely to change? Am I willing to draft a cornerback at number 2? So look, it's stupid to draft a cornerback at number 2. Don't draft any cornerback in the top 24 or probably 30. Draft them after that, but only draft them in the top 2. If you're really, really, really sure, the thing I said to you in midweek, I'm not drafting a cornerback 2, even if it's Peanut Tillman. And I believe in him like I believe any cornerback. I certainly don't believe in Brian Branch, who hasn't done it, and who I don't think is going to do it. If he does, brilliant. But, the chances of the guy you draft at cornerback 30 and Brian Branch doing well are basically the same. So don't do it at 2.
Yeah. And that's the right way to look at it, right? Like even for me, like as somebody that is, quote unquote higher on Brian Branch, like it's really just about if I'm ranking corners, which is, what we have him as on PFF.com,
Right.
and what, his true position might be on some platforms, then I'm pretty much just ranking them on which ones I trust versus distrust the least, I guess. And Branch was the one that I found myself actually kind of feeling optimistic about, like usage wise. Like he did play primarily in the slot last year. He was only coming out there when the offense was in 11 personnel, basically, which, we do like that slot role, but we also want it to be a full-time role. And he had strong tackle production, strong first contact race around the ball. And, he, again, wasn't a full-time player, but the one thing, just trying to follow what the Lions beat has been this year, it's been they've been pretty insistent this offseason on having as many DBs on the field as possible, which, that worries me for the linebackers.
Which is sensible.
Yeah, right. It absolutely
that's
should
modern
happen.
football. If I was running a defense, that's exactly what I'd do. I'd put the skinny, flexible guys out there.
Yeah,
But IDP is
take
a whole
Alex
different thing.
Anzalone off the field. Yeah, and for Branch, like what they've been saying around him, which I found interesting, is that he should be splitting his time at safety and nickel. Where I guess what that could mean to me is that he's playing nickel when the offense is in 11 personnel and not. And then playing safety when not. I don't know. Again, we don't know how much to believe in the offseason. We have to see it before we can actually believe it. But I feel, I guess, better about him. I think there's, a potential for an increase in overall snap volume. And then, within that snap volume, getting prime IDP alignments and usage makes him more deserving of a higher DB rank. But that being said, like I'm with you, I'm not spending up on these guys in regular drafts, either redraft or dynasty. It's just not happening. But as far as having to rank players, like 1 to 12 and so on, that I felt were most deserving, I still included Branch in there, even knowing that it's unlikely to happen considering the instability of the position. And there's so many other qualifying players that could get there.
Yeah, even the way you just said it, sorry, I'm going to pick apart your words. But the way you sort of backed them up was going, if X and then Y. Right. And as soon as you've got to put two qualifiers of things happening in, your chances of it happening are sort of getting smaller and smaller.
For sure.
So just looking at personnel last year, so the way I've got it, the Lions played about 21% in base last year. So that doesn't sound much, like only 21%, but the difference is, unless he's a full-time player, that's 1 in 5 snaps he's sitting on the bench for. Yep. And it's possible it's not. It definitely could happen. But if you look at there and go, decent chance he's not on the field 1 in 5 snaps, that's a real problem. So again, we'll sort of pack over it. You're looking at a team playing roughly 1,100 snaps now. So if you lose 1 in 5 snaps, you're looking at something north of 200 snaps per year, which is equivalent to over 3 games. And if you go, I've got two guys, one of them's going to play 16 games, one of them's going to play 19. Who do you want? It's a no-brainer, right? And that's the sort of difference we're talking about. Now, again, it comes back to, do you think he's going to be a full-time player or not? And if you do, he's one of those 32 guys. Cool, no problem. I'm happy with that. Right. But there's probably a 50% chance of him not being one of the top 30 you trust, and that's way too rich for my blood.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I'm probably buying too much into the coach speak here of them, deploying him as a full-time player this year. Actually, you know what? It'll be funny. Hopefully we could get like some hints tonight, because the Lions do play tonight, their first preseason game. But we're recording this Thursday, but it'll be out on Friday. So hopefully we could get some hints. I'll tweet out some Snapchat,
more than a hint,
things like that. Yeah.
So that's one of those things. I mean, preseason is preseason, right? And you can't tell anything. One of the few things I really, really believe is how they use defensive backs on the first drive or two of preseason. Right. And they're generally pretty honest with it. And you can tell who's a full-time guy, and you can tell whether they're going to play in the slot or deep or outside or combine of that. So I think it's really worth doing a quick breakdown of Brian Bryant snap by snap. And everyone at home, it's worth doing this. So get it up on all 22 or whatever you want, and get used to now in the preseason, get used to working out what jersey number you're looking for and following a particular player and seeing what they're doing, because that skill is really, really useful in the season, and it's way easier to do in preseason. So get used to it. It's the worst with the Lions, because my argument is the Lions jerseys are the hardest to see numbers. That grey on blue, or that awful grey kit they wear with light blue, and you're like, every single number looks like a 0. I don't know what you're doing, and it's a nightmare to see. But I think preseason is really worth watching the first drive, maybe the first 2 drives, and charting them, just going deep, corner, outside, slot, whatever, and get in that habit, and it will change the way you watch football.
Yeah, the nice thing about Brian Branch is if you're following him, he wears that the green mouth guard attached to his helmet, right? It looks like a little antenna, so he makes it really easy for us to track him around the field, which is amazing, and I appreciate. And then they got other guys that look different aesthetically, like Alex Anzalone with the long blonde flowing hair out there, right? But yeah, those jerseys are impossible to read. As somebody who's had to do data collection for PFF and try to read those things, they're a nightmare. So
as our friend Sigmund Bloom would say, you've got the sickness when you're really used to looking at mouth guards and sock length and what people's cleats look like and all that sort of stuff. And we spend hours doing that, right? It's part of the game.
Yeah. Absolutely. So there you have it, folks. You could fade these players into oblivion and prosper. That is the theme of the show. But if you listen to this episode, it does mean that you're willing to actually learn about IDP and the things that matter for winning your leagues, which is actually rare for IDP because so many people will ignore this stuff and stubbornly draft the same way every year, refusing to acknowledge, proven data, but not you guys. So thank you all so much for tuning in. If you're on the YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd appreciate it a ton. And it continues to let PFF know that IDP matters to you all. Also, I cannot thank Tom Kislingbury enough for doing this with me today. Tom, I always enjoy our chance to chat IDP in the off season. So thank you as always for coming on here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Absolutely. And before you go, please do let everybody know what else you have going on this off season as well.
Mostly chasing around off my daughters, if I'm honest. That's what I'm doing. So I'm doing bits and pieces. I've just been talking to some of the guys at DLF literally today, actually, and putting together a content plan for the year. So at the moment, I've just been on DLF, very rarely on Twitter, talking about what's going on and what I think is useful in IDP. Now, my boss actually in my day job just did a quite a high profile podcast on Twitter and the evil of social media and organizing riots today. So I'm not going to talk about that, but listen to that. It's quite good. And apart from that, I'll be writing through the season and trying to do weekly. These are things you should pay attention to. And all of this is smokescreen in IDP, which it is hard to see the wood for the trees because there's a lot of nonsense out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Love that. Definitely make sure you're following Tom's work. And as for me, I'm in the process of updating my IDP rankings, which will get up on the site by the end of this week, I believe. And then Monday, I'll have IDP preseason takeaways on the site as well, because we got football back and there should be plenty of hopefully actionable information to pull from these preseason games. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, peace out.